The wind howled like a warning. Her power was out, the woods were silent, too silent. Then a growl. Not from her old dog. From deeper in the cabin. She froze. Footsteps. A shadow moved past the window. And then, glass shattered. Everyone had told her she was reckless for keeping a wild lynx. That Bran would turn on her. That it would end in blood. They were half right. But that night, when the man broke into her home, it wasn't her phone, or her dog, or even the locked doors that saved her. It was the lynx. The one she never let go. The night everything broke. The storm rolled in without warning. No gentle rumble, no drizzle to soften its arrival, just a crack of lightning that split the pine-lined sky, and darkness swallowing the cabin whole. Eva Callahan stood in the kitchen, one hand on a chipped ceramic mug, the other reaching blindly toward the drawer for candles. The power blinked once. Gone. Again. Still gone. Damn, she whispered. Milo, her aging golden retriever, lifted his head from the braided rug by the stove but didn't move. Too tired. Too old. He blinked sleepily, unconcerned. But the other creature in the cabin was already on his feet. Bran, 2.5 years old, 80 pounds of wild muscle under a coat of smoky gray fur with faint black rosettes, stood near the back door. His tufted ears flicked toward the window. His golden eyes burned. His tail, short and bobbed like a question mark, twitched once. She stepped closer, candle in one hand, the other hovering near his thick shoulder. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't move. Then came the sound. Faint, but unmistakable, the crunch of boots on gravel. Not the road. The path. Her path. Private land. Her pulse jumped. She reached for her phone. No signal. Useless. The footsteps grew louder. Deliberate. Heavy. Not a neighbor. Clint wouldn't come up in a storm like this. And no one else was supposed to know she lived out here. Bran turned his body, positioning himself between her and the window. Milo whimpered, finally rising. And then the glass shattered. The window over the sink exploded inward, shards raining down over the counter. A man's voice cursed low. A silhouette dropped through the broken frame. Tall, bulky, wearing a hood. He didn't hesitate, moved like he'd been inside before. Eva screamed. Backed away, heart slamming. The man lunged, but before his boots hit the floor, Bran hit him first. It happened fast, too fast. A blur of gray muscle. A sound like a growl and a roar in one. The man stumbled, then screamed as claws tore across his jacket. He swung wildly. A knife flashed in his hand. Bran. Eva cried. But the lynx wasn't retreating. The man backed toward the broken window. Bran drove forward again, slicing a gash across the intruder's leg. The man dropped the knife. He crashed through the glass he'd entered moments before and vanished into the dark, leaving behind only blood, breath, and shattered silence. Eva dropped to her knees, shaking. Bran stood panting in the broken frame, chest heaving, a single line of red across his shoulder, not his blood. Milo barked once, late to the alarm. Sirens wailed in the far-off distance. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, Eva had already bandaged Bran's cut, swept the worst of the glass away, and secured the back door with a heavy wooden plank. She answered their questions mechanically, gave them the direction the man had run, showed them the knife. The officer eyed Bran warily. "You know," he said finally, "this isn't the kind of animal meant to be indoors." "I know," she replied softly. "You're lucky he didn't turn on you instead." She looked over at the big lynx, curled on the rug now, licking his paw, indifferent to the chaos he'd just silenced. He didn't. The officer wrote something down, then nodded, too tired to argue. They left. And Eva, with hands still trembling, knelt beside Bran and laid her cheek gently against his fur. "If it weren't for you," she whispered, voice cracking, "I wouldn't be here." Bran blinked slowly. He didn't purr, he rarely did, but he didn't move away either. She closed her eyes, remembering another night. Another storm. Another time he had saved her in a way no one else could. But that was 2 winters ago, in the deep Montana snow. Before the threats. Before the fire. Before the laws and the stairs and the quiet exile. Before Bran chose her. And before she chose to keep him, no matter the cost. The cub in the snow. 2 winters ago, the world was quieter. And crueler. Eva had arrived in Montana not for the solitude, but because it was the only place left untouched by her memories. Her father had died the month before, pancreatic cancer that moved faster than they expected. Faster than she could accept. There was nothing left for her in Seattle except cold hospital halls and a grief that sat too close to her skin. The Bitterroot Mountains offered her the kind of isolation that didn't ask questions. A small A-frame cabin she bought with her father's life insurance check. No neighbors in sight, just towering pines and the clean ache of wind slicing across the hills. The kind of place you go when you want to disappear quietly. It was late January. One of those wide-out mornings when the snow swallows sound and time. She'd gone out to check the fence behind the shed. Something had been setting off Milo's nervous pacing at night. Maybe deer. Maybe something hungrier. She saw the blood first. A smear across the snow, vivid as paint. Then movement, a struggling shape tangled in rusted barbed wire that had come loose from an old livestock pen. Her breath caught. She thought at first it was a fox. Too big for a house cat. Too small for a cougar. It was a lynx cub. He was tiny for his species. Maybe 5 months old. His coat was patchy, thin over a skeletal frame. Pale gray with faint spotted markings on the flanks, dark tufts on his ears like little flags. One leg was twisted painfully, tangled in rust and metal. His body trembled with exhaustion, breath fogging fast. She should have called someone. That was the rule. She had the number for Fish and Wildlife taped to the fridge. But the cub's eyes found hers, golden and sharp despite the pain, and something inside her folded. Not broke. Folded. Like an old map showing a road she thought was long gone. She didn't think. Just acted. Eva pulled off her gloves and knelt beside the creature. He didn't fight her touch. He was too weak. With her multi-tool, she cut the wire. Blood soaked into her jacket as she wrapped him in an old wool blanket and carried him back through the snow. Inside, she laid him in the corner near the stove. Milo sniffed at the bundle, then sat, suspicious but calm. She brewed chamomile tea for herself, not the cub, and opened a can of tuna, then another, warming the meat with boiled water. The cub didn't eat that night. But he watched her. And when she sat across from him, whispering nonsense about how she had no idea what the hell she was doing, he blinked slowly. Once. Twice. Then let out a low, shuddering sigh. Like he was home. Or maybe, safe for the first time in a long while. She didn't name him that night. But in her journal, on the first page since her father died, she wrote one word beneath the date. Bran. Named for the mountain trees. The ones that bend but never break. Bran survived the night. By morning, he'd shifted position slightly, just enough for Eva to see that the gash on his leg had clotted. His breaths were slower, less erratic. When she slid a bowl of broth across the floor, he didn't move, but he didn't flinch either. Progress. Over the next 3 days, Eva's small cabin transformed into a makeshift recovery ward. She borrowed old towels from storage, cleared out a closet for medical supplies, and turned a stack of firewood into a barricade to keep Bran from wandering too far while he healed. She stayed up through the nights, reading articles, calling anonymous wildlife forums from a prepaid phone, pretending she was just curious about feeding a lynx kitten. She learned fast. No milk, no kibble. Raw rabbit, chicken, bone-in if possible. Small meals. Warmed. Hydration through oral syringes if he refused to drink. And most of all, space. But the strange thing was, Bran didn't seem to want space. He never tried to run. He never hissed. He simply watched. Listened. He tracked her every movement with those gold flint eyes, sometimes blinking slow when she spoke in her softest voice. Eva couldn't explain it. It wasn't tameness. Not exactly. It was recognition. Like grief knows grief. He let her clean the wound. He let her touch his ears. He even purred once, low and thunderous, surprising both of them. Milo was skeptical at first. He kept a healthy distance, occasionally growling under his breath when Bran's movements were too sudden. But Bran, to everyone's surprise, respected the dog's authority. He kept his distance. He sniffed, then stepped back. He never challenged Milo's space. By the second week, Bran was standing. Limping, yes, but standing. He made it to the window by himself. Pressed his paws to the glass. The mountains stared back. Eva sat beside him on the floor, mug of coffee in her hands, heart twisting. She knew what she was supposed to do. What everyone would say. This wasn't a house cat. It wasn't hers to keep. This was a wild animal, and keeping him was illegal. But Bran didn't feel wild. Not entirely. And she hadn't felt alive since her father died. Since the phone call, since the last hospital visit, since the silence of a city that moved on without her. Every sound Bran made, the chirps, the low grunts, the rustle of his paws, cut through that silence. She called the Fish and Wildlife line one morning, then hung up after the first ring. The second time, she pressed the number, and stared at it for 10 minutes. Then she deleted it. That night, while Bran slept curled beneath the stove, Eva knelt beside Milo's bed and whispered, "They'll take him. And they won't see him like we do." Milo blinked. Bran stirred slightly, his tail twitching in sleep. "No," she said aloud. "Not while I still have something left to love." And with that, the decision was made, not in one grand moment, but in 100 quiet ones stitched together by warmth, instinct, and grief. 3 hearts under one roof. By spring, the snow melted into soft rivers and slush. Bran had doubled in size. His limp had all but vanished, replaced by the sleek, confident stride of a predator rediscovering its body. He moved through the cabin with purpose now, fluid, quiet, calculating. But it wasn't just his strength that surprised Eva. It was the way he watched her. Not with hunger. Not with fear. With curiosity. She'd read that lynxes were solitary. Mysterious. Borderline untrainable. And maybe that was still true, somewhere deep in Bran's bones. But here, under her roof, he seemed to be rewriting his own instincts day by day. He learned her patterns. Waited by the stove when she cooked. Perched on the windowsill at dusk. Rested beside Milo on the rug, one massive paw nearly touching the dog's graying fur. Eva began to speak less. Not from fear, she'd simply found that silence worked better. A low hum when she brought his food. A 2-tap rhythm on the table for no. A soft whistle when she stepped outside. Bran responded. Not like a trained pet, but like something older, something wild still learning the contours of trust. He would tilt his head, flick his ears, and then slowly do what she asked. He'd never meow. Lynxes don't. But sometimes when she lit the fire at night, he'd make a sound she could only describe as a yowl swallowed by thunder, low and rumbling and strange. It was beautiful. And haunting. She documented everything in her old field notebook, originally meant for botany sketches. Now it held pages and pages of Bran's habits, sounds, sleep rhythms, and changes in diet. In the margins, she wrote poems. Short, raw lines about the weight of grief, the strange balm of fur against skin, and the way some creatures arrive just when the heart begins to rot. Milo, bless him, accepted Bran more fully than she expected. Maybe because the lynx never challenged him. Maybe because animals understand sorrow in ways we never can. Eva began to leave the back door open on warmer days. Bran would slip into the woods, explore, return before nightfall. Once, he dragged back a rabbit. He didn't eat it. He dropped it on the porch like an offering and then sat at the door, waiting for her to open it. She buried the rabbit with shaking hands, whispered thank you, and gave Bran a raw chicken thigh instead. By midsummer, they had a rhythm. Not quite domestic. Not quite wild. Something in between. Something sacred. And when people asked, on the rare occasion she drove into town, what she did out there all alone, Eva would just smile and say, "Not as alone as you think." The first real trouble came with the Hargroves. They moved into the neighboring property in late summer, a modern prefab cabin that clashed with the wild quiet of the woods. Clint Hargrove was ex-military, barrel-chested, always in a camouflage cap, and full of opinions. His wife, quiet but watchful. Their 10-year-old daughter Lacey loved to sing as she skipped rocks on the nearby stream. Eva kept her distance. But distance didn't guarantee peace. It started with a conversation at the mailbox, a rare crossing of paths on the winding gravel road that linked their homes. "Hey," Clint said, nodding. "You the one with the big cat?" Eva's stomach tightened. She kept her face neutral. Excuse me. My kid saw it. Said there's some kind of giant bobcat lounging on your porch last week. That true? She smiled faintly. She probably saw a coyote. We get a lot of them. Wasn't a coyote, he snapped. And that ain't a bobcat either. That thing's huge. If it hurts my dog or my daughter, there's gonna be a problem. Eva's hands stayed at her sides. Calm. Still. He hasn't hurt anyone. Yet. She walked away without answering. A week later, Lacey's toy poodle went missing. Clint came roaring up her driveway in his dusty pickup, fists clenched, face red. You think I'm stupid? That cat killed my daughter's dog. Eva stepped out onto the porch, Bran watching from behind the screen door, calm as stone. He didn't, she said firmly. I haven't let him out since last week. I'm sorry about your dog, but it wasn't him. You can't prove that. And you can't prove otherwise. He spat in the dirt. You're playing God with something that don't belong in your house. It's not a pet, lady. It's a loaded gun with fur. That night, Eva locked every door. She checked the shed. She slept with a flashlight in one hand and Milo curled at her side. 3 days later, Bran stopped Milo from eating the poisoned meat. It was laid near the woodshed, 2 hunks of raw venison, 2 red, 2 neat. Bran sniffed it once, then hissed and knocked it over before Milo could investigate. Eva saw the powder, just a fine white dust, and buried both pieces deep in the snow. She didn't call the sheriff. She didn't knock on Clint's door. She just sat beside Bran that evening, her hand on his thick shoulder, heart pounding from the knowledge of how close it had come. I won't let them take you, she whispered. Bran didn't respond. He simply pressed his massive head to her knee and exhaled. There was a war building. One made of silence, fences, and sideways glances. And Eva knew, sooner or later, it would come to a head. But for now, she still had Bran. And the wild peace they'd fought to build. The distance between us. By the following winter, the rhythm had shifted. Not shattered, but changed subtly, like the first signs of ice forming beneath a running stream. Bran had grown massive. His coat thickened into a dense winter pelt, the smoky gray fading to a paler silver along his back and sides. The black rosettes had deepened in contrast, and his muscles moved like water beneath the fur. Even Milo, once the senior guardian of the cabin, had started giving the Lynx a wider berth. There was no animosity, just quiet recognition of a new hierarchy. Eva felt it too. There were moments, brief but sharp, when Bran would stare out the window with a look that made her throat tighten. Not fear, not rejection. Just distance. The kind that couldn't be bridged by soft whistles or shared silence. He would disappear for hours now. Sometimes a full night. He always returned, paws dusted with pine needles and frost, whiskers twitching like he carried some secret wind. At first, she waited with worry. Then, with understanding. And finally, with a bitter knot of acceptance. She never told anyone, but she started dreaming about letting him go. In these dreams, she would carry Bran in her arms like the day she found him, walk him to the edge of the tree line, and open her hands. And in every dream, he would look back. Not with sadness. Not with thanks. Just with the silent certainty of a wild thing answering its call. Those mornings were the hardest. One afternoon, Eva stood in the snow with a handmade travel crate, large enough for a lynx, lined with the same wool blanket she'd first wrapped him in. She opened the door. Bran watched from the porch. His ears flicked. She gave him no signal. No cue. Just walked, slowly, steadily, toward the edge of the woods. The spot where the pines thickened and the land turned truly untamed. He followed. Not quickly. Not hesitantly. Just followed. At the edge, she set the crate down and opened the far gate. The wind whispered through the trees. Branches creaked. Far off, a raven called. Bran stepped forward. She didn't touch him. Didn't speak. He sniffed the threshold. Then sat. Minutes passed. 10. 15. Her fingers went numb. Her breath came in tight clouds. Her heart beat so loud she could barely hear the forest anymore. And then, slowly, Bran turned. He walked back to her. Not rushed. Not triumphant. Just sure. He brushed past her leg on his way back up the hill, tail flicking against her calf like punctuation. A full sentence without a single word. Eva stood frozen. She had prepared herself for heartbreak. For a final moment that would both shatter and free her. But she wasn't prepared for choice. For him choosing her again. Back at the cabin, she removed the crate and folded the blanket with trembling hands. Milo lifted his head as Bran entered, then laid it back down without protest. Eva built a fire and sat in front of it long after the flames caught. Bran lay beside her, not curled this time, but stretched out. Long and sprawling. As if he knew there was no need for caution now. She stroked his back, tracing the curve of his spine. He let her. "I would have let you go," she whispered. "If you'd asked." Bran didn't move. But his tail curled once. Just once. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Thicker. Slower. Covering the forest in a quiet that only those who have truly listened can understand. And though no one else would believe it, Eva felt it with a clarity that chilled her. Bran didn't stay because he was trapped. He stayed because, somewhere between sorrow and survival, they had become each other's wilderness. Not pet. Not prisoner. Not owner. Not keeper. Just two creatures who had decided, against reason, against rules, against the voices of neighbors and the threats of laws, that this was home. The fire line. It started with the dry lightning. A freak summer storm, rumbling in low over the Bitterroot Mountains. No rain, just fire in the clouds. Eva watched from the porch, a cracked cup of coffee in her hands. Bran stretched out beside her like a statue carved from smoke and muscle. The wind shifted sharply mid-morning. By noon, she smelled it, burning pine. Not from her chimney. From somewhere deep and wrong. She stepped into the yard and turned north. A dark plume was rising behind the ridgeline. Fast. She didn't wait for the emergency alert. By the time she started packing, the sheriff's truck was already crawling up the gravel road, a bullhorn crackling over the engine. Mandatory evacuation for Darby Ridge. This is not a drill. Eva threw open the back of her pickup and moved fast. Milo's leash. A bin of supplies. The lockbox with her father's letters. A battered frame with a photo of the three of them, Bran, Milo, and herself, curled near the old wood stove. She turned back to the cabin. "Bran," she called. "Come on." He didn't appear. Her stomach dropped. She searched the cabin. Under the bed. Behind the kitchen shelves. Out in the lean-to shed. Nothing. "Bran!" She shouted louder, panic rising. "We have to go." Milo barked once, ears flattened. And then she saw him, at the tree line. Watching. Still. Ears up. Eyes unreadable. She took 2 steps forward. "Don't do this," she said, voice cracking. "Not now." He didn't move. The smoke was thicker now. Ash fell like snowflakes. The wind howled through the branches with an angry whistle. Eva grabbed his food bowl from the porch and shook it hard. "Bran, let's go. Please." He turned and vanished into the trees. She stood frozen. And then, against every ounce of logic, she ran after him. The forest was suffocating. Smoke twisted between the trees, visibility shrinking. She stumbled over roots and ducked under low branches, screaming his name until her throat burned. Then, through the smoke, she saw him. He wasn't running away. He was circling. Pacing. Herding her, backwards. Bran leapt in front of her, cutting her off from one trail, then veering left again. She turned with him. It wasn't random. He was guiding her. To safety. They burst into a narrow deer path she hadn't taken in years, a shortcut to the lower creek bed. Fire roared somewhere behind them now. Trees cracked in the heat. The air shimmered. Bran stopped at the edge of the creek and looked back. Eva dropped to her knees, gasping. Milo caught up moments later, wheezing, his fur dusted in soot. They all lay there, in mud and ash and trembling silence, as the wall of fire surged just beyond the hill. A thunderous crash broke the stillness. Eva whipped around. From the ridge above, she saw it, a massive pine, old and brittle, collapsed in flames, directly onto the roof of her cabin. In a single breath, the home she had rebuilt brick by memory-stitched brick vanished into orange. Eva choked on a sob. Bran pressed against her side, not gently but firmly, like he was anchoring her to this moment. This survival. They stayed by the creek until dawn. The fire moved fast and was gone almost as quickly, the line of destruction carving through the valley like a scar. When the sun finally broke through the haze, Eva looked at the lynx beside her, covered in soot, his ears twitching but alert, his coat matted with ash. She reached for him, and this time, Bran did something she'd never seen him do before. He lay his head in her lap. No sound. No purr. Just trust. Just the weight of a creature who had no reason to stay, except that he had. And in that moment, soaked in mud, heart broken open by survival, Eva understood the cost of wild love. It can't be owned. It can't be named safe. But sometimes, it saves your life anyway. What the world doesn't see. The cabin was gone. Reduced to cinders and twisted metal and the charred ghost of a roofline Eva had once memorized. Fire crews told her it had taken less than 20 minutes. One spark, fanned by the wind, had swallowed her home and half the ridge behind it. But the animals had survived. That should have been enough. Except, it wasn't just Eva watching anymore. The morning after the fire, a drone from a local news station hovered above the ruins, capturing footage for the evening report. In the shot, barely visible but clear enough, was Bran, perched on a fallen log, back arched, eyes gleaming in the smoke. The image went viral within hours. A bobcat. In the aftermath of a fire. Beside a human. Calm. Speculation exploded. Blogs. Comment sections. Wildlife forums dissected every pixel of the footage, arguing whether he had been tamed, drugged, rescued, or illegally confined. Some called it beautiful. Others, reckless. Dangerous. And just like that, Eva's secret life was no longer hers alone. The local authorities came first. A fish and wildlife officer, young, polite, but firm, knocked on the temporary trailer door where Eva had been staying. We received some footage. Anonymous tips. People are concerned. Eva didn't flinch. She'd been waiting. He's alive because of me, she said quietly. The officer nodded. Maybe. But you've been in violation of several wildlife codes. Keeping a North American lynx as a personal pet, without a license or enclosure, is against Montana regulation. He's not a pet. That may be true, the officer replied, but the law doesn't know the difference. She was given a week. Either surrender Bran to an accredited wildlife sanctuary or face seizure and possible legal charges. She stared at the document after he left. Folded it. Unfolded it. Folded it again. Bran sat across the room, grooming a patch of soot from his shoulder. Milo was asleep at his feet, dreaming with his paws twitching. Eva whispered, "They don't see you." That night, she stayed up writing. She told the whole story, everything from the barbed wire and tuna cans to the fire and the creek bed. She attached photos, Bran curled beside Milo, the framed picture from her old cabin, even pages from her notebook, illustrations of Bran's paw prints, notes in her own handwriting. She posted it to a local forum. Then to a wildlife discussion board. Then, to the world. The story took root. Comments flooded in. Journalists reached out. People from across the country shared photos of their own rescued animals, messages of support, petitions begging Montana officials to let Bran stay. But the law stood still. And Eva, exhausted, grieving, and out of time, made the only decision left. She drove Bran to the Clear Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, 61 miles north, nestled in a canyon surrounded by stone cliffs and fir trees. The staff there, to their credit, were kind. Professional. They built Bran a large, semi-wild enclosure, filled with logs and burrows and privacy. They even allowed Eva to visit twice a week. The first time she came, Bran didn't look at her. He paced the perimeter of his space, ears back, tail flicking like a flame, refusing to go out. The second visit, he came closer. She didn't reach through the fence. Just sat and hummed softly, the same tune she used to hum when warming his food near the old stove. Bran paused. His ears turned toward the sound. And then, slowly, deliberately, he pressed his forehead to the chain link. She stayed there, knees in the gravel, not crying, not speaking, just breathing with him. When it was time to leave, Bran climbed the wooden perch in the far corner of his enclosure and watched her go. Not trapped. Not broken. Still Bran. Still hers, just farther away. No one believed me, until he did. A year passed. Seasons rolled over the Bitterroot Range like waves. Crisp autumn gold, long-veined snows, the soft green thaw of spring. Eva built a new cabin, smaller than the last, higher up the ridge where the fire hadn't reached. She planted a dogwood tree beside it. The soil was black and rich, still smelling faintly of smoke. Milo was gone. He had passed quietly one morning in his sleep, his head resting near the hearth where Bran used to lie. Eva buried him beneath the dogwood with the same wool blanket that had once wrapped a trembling lynx cub. She marked the spot with a flat river stone. There were no framed photographs anymore. No rugs or photos of forest trails. But the cabin was warm. Lived in. Braver than before. She kept one thing on the shelf above her bed, a handmade wooden toy with claw marks across the side. A chew toy Bran had once dragged in from the woods. The last object untouched by fire, found half buried in the creek mud. Twice a week, she drove to Clear Creek. The sanctuary staff greeted her with respectful nods now. They didn't ask questions anymore. They understood, at least partially, the kind of bond that doesn't translate well on paper. Bran had changed. His shoulders were broader, his stare more distant. But something in him always shifted when he saw her. He would rise slowly from the tall grass in his enclosure, ears twitching, tail curled upward. He never ran to her. But he always came. She brought him frozen rabbit thighs, sometimes a blanket that smelled like pine and old flannel. She'd sit by the fence and speak softly, stories, updates, poems she never showed anyone. He listened. That was enough. One afternoon, as summer heat began to mellow, she stayed past closing. The light dipped golden over the mountains. A storm was building behind the ridgeline, high clouds flickering with electric threads. And then she heard it. A low growl. Not Bran's. From the tree line across the gravel lot, something watched her. It stepped forward, slow, cautious. Another lynx. Smaller. Younger. Wild. Its coat was reddish, spotted boldly across its flanks, and its left ear was notched as if from a recent fight. Its amber eyes locked onto hers without fear. Eva didn't move. The wind shifted. Behind her, Bran stirred from the grass. He rose, watching the intruder with a steady gaze but made no move to threaten. The young lynx took another step. Closer. And then paused. Eva knelt down slowly, never breaking eye contact. The animal's nostrils flared. It was smelling the space between them. The past. The grief. The wildness. It didn't flee. Just stood there, for a full breath, then two, before vanishing back into the woods without a sound. Eva stayed there, heart drumming with something old and sacred. A ripple passed through her, the realization that some connections leave trails, even after they end. That what Bran had been to her might ripple out in ways she couldn't see. Not all wild things need to be tamed to stay close. Not all love needs a leash. She rose to her feet, turned to Bran, and smiled. Still watching over me? He didn't answer. He never did. But he blinked slowly. And in that blink, she saw everything she needed. The trust. The fire. The choosing. For all the warnings, all the doubt, all the fear others tried to pour into her chest like water in a leaky boat, she'd held fast. And the wild had answered. Not in words. But in presence. And in the end, she realized something that no law, no neighbor, no official ever truly grasped. She hadn't saved Bran. He had saved her. Over and over again. And she would never stop choosing him back. Some bonds defy explanation, born not from words, but from quiet acts of trust and instinct. Eva and Bran's story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes, it has claws. Sometimes, it lives behind golden eyes and speaks through silence. In a world eager to define, contain, and regulate, their connection survived because they chose to listen, to each other, to the wild, and to the heart's quiet defiance. It teaches us that healing often begins in the most unexpected companionships, and that choosing love, even when it's inconvenient or misunderstood, is an act of bravery. At Paw Prints Stories, we share these deeply human animal connections to remind you of the invisible threads that tie us to nature and to each other. If this story moved you, we invite you to stay connected, because there are more tales to tell, more creatures who've touched lives, and more quiet courage waiting to be seen. What would you do if the wild came to your door, not to harm you, but to heal you?